guys, let's kick off with Bart. Obviously, it's all to do with our recent release of our street food dough. So Bart will go into a little bit of detail about the product and why we've released it and why we're talking about this particular product today. And then we'll go from there. So over to you, Bart.
Okay. Hi guys. Hello. So a little bit about me. My name is Bart. I've been really in the bakery and pizza business for the last 20 years. And that sort of was ranging, and mainly that was food manufacturing. So I used to run big bakeries. I used to run food businesses, and my last business that I was an MD of was a business where we would make 20 tons of pizza dough every day, and for various different places. These days, I'm a freelance sort of pizza consultant, and I advise food manufacturing businesses like Sturdy Foods, but also pizzerias and also pizza chains and also millers, etc., etc. My personal journey with, and the reason why I'm saying that is my personal journey with street food was very was super exciting, and it was a great bit of chapter in my life when I was sitting at the top of the boardroom making tons of frozen dough. COVID came, and we became super quiet. And one of the things that I always wanted to do, being stuck in factories, boardrooms, and development centres, was to go back and supplying hundreds of pizzerias around the country. I never had a first-hand experience with dough, so we've set up a little street food thing with a friendly family. And as it was during COVID, within weeks, we were just flooded, and we had to sort of make it up as we went along. And at the end of the day, we've run it for about a year, and I'm running concurrently two businesses. And we were doing street food, we were doing events, we were doing weddings, we were doing stag do's, hens do's. We were in the queue between a sandwich between strippers, the whole lot. So, we sort of discontinued that business, and I went back to focus on my real job. But when we sort of started talking with guys at Sturdy Foods about the street food movement, I, as a product developer, felt that there's a gap on the market because nobody really understands the challenges that the street food and the mobile operators, catering operators, the struggles that they have. And one of the first struggles that I used to have when I used to make my own dough is, well, I couldn't really go to bed before my big event because I was churning up the dough sort of crazy hours in the late into the night or super early in the morning. And so today is all about a little bit of science of why we think there's a certain approach to make the street food dough work and how we address that. So there's going to be a little bit of bakery science and bakery knowledge that might convince you at one point and give you some food for thought. And then it sort of leans into how we design the dough. And the whole idea of it really is that, as you, Georgina, pointed out, there's an awful lot of very poor mobile catering offerings. And, I've been there. You turn up on the hands door a wedding and the dough doesn't work, and then I've got nothing. I've absolutely got nothing to do. For me, it was the scariest thought before every single event. Me being the dough expert, I still felt, what am I going to do if the dough doesn't work? And sometimes it happened. And I was making my own dough, and then I moved to frozen dough. And when I've moved to frozen dough, I started focusing on customer service and toppings rather than obsessing about my dough and just getting really frustrated. So today, I'm just going to share my screen. So today is all about how we think a street food dough should be designed and how it really should be, and what's the science behind it. So I'm going to do a lot of talking and a nerdy talk. I'm sorry for that, and then we can have a little chat. But there's I think this is pretty exciting. The bit about that for any mobile caterer, it is the difficulty of dough management in events catering is off the scale. And I've been working with pizzerias for 20 years now, and they find dough management continuously a major issue. I've been there. You know, we sometimes had to park the van half a mile from where we were serving, which meant even if we had a chilled van, which we didn't, we couldn't control the rate of fermentation. We were eagerly anticipating the start of service, which was delayed, and our dough was overproofing. So we had all. I'm familiar with all those instances of things going terribly wrong. So managing dough temperature and fermentation rate in various conditions without temperature control is almost mission impossible. And I found myself super panicking about weather forecasts and see if it was cold, if it was raining, if it was the humidity changes, the temperature changes, and I'll show you in a minute on the curve how dramatic that is. Ensuring I've got my dough performance window between under and overproof is sufficient enough so I can do my service, including the travel time, including loading time, including unloading time, and a setup time. Usually, a pizzeria would just take the dough out from the fridge, prove it for a few hours. If they see no one's coming, they put it back in the fridge. I, as a street food or mobile operator, I didn't have any of those facilities, and sometimes I was literally panicking about the service being delayed by an hour or two. I really wanted my dough to be resistant to over fermenting, because if I overproof and over ferment my dough, the dough would be tearing. The torn dough would be getting stuck on the stone of the oven, which meant that I have to clean the oven where I've got a queue of people, and it just gets everyone out of a rhythm. And I remember some services with overproof dough. That was quite disastrous because every third or fourth pizza would tear, and that I'm going to touch on it why it happens. So we really want to have an easy to open but not tearing pizza. That's it. If the dough is underproofed, we're going to be struggling with elasticity of the dough. The dough will be pulling back. It'll be biscuity. We'll be delaying the opening of pieces. Will take ages. People will get absolutely, super frustrated. If the dough is over fermented, it will open really easy, but then it will tear, or it will collapse, or it will be difficult to form a nice sort of disc. So how do we increase the dough resistance? So we need to control the inputs, which is super difficult in mobile catering scenario, because a lot of us would not have commercial kitchens or commercial storages. But the control of inputs, it covers the fermentation rate, which I'm going to speak a little bit about that, and very, very important, the level of enzymes. If our dough is overactive in terms of enzymes, it will be falling off of cliff really quickly. It will be exponentially sort of ferment, and then there'll be a point where it will become unusable, and it's very difficult to control. Using a high quality and very strong flour with a high protein content is super important, because the gluten, the amount of it and the quality of it increases that performance window. As protein break down, we have more of it, and we have it more resistant to breakdown. So we're building that strong gluten matrix. The strong gluten matrix, unfortunately, means the dough is elastic. So we have to put some belts and braces to make sure the dough is extensible and have that sweet spot where the gluten is built in a really robust way. The protein is strong, but the dough is not pulling back. So we have just that fine balance of what's called gluten damage. We need to be controlling starch to sugar conversion. This is super nerdy, but as you hydrate your dough, and it depends on your flour and the amount what millers would call starch damage, the water will be going into interaction with starches that's ever present in the flour, and enzymes will be breaking down that starches into simple sugars that then feed the yeast. If your rate of extraction of that starches into sugar is not controlled and maybe too volatile, your dough will suddenly sort of spring up. Your rate of fermentation will suddenly increase, because the simple sugars throughout the proofing is being released into the dough. So sometimes using too much or using the wrong diastatic mold, for example, which a lot of people doing these days because of New York, because it's very trendy. But diastatic mold is to be used the right amount, the right type of it, because it can really make your dough volatile and make your dough unexpectedly volatile in different situations. Really, really important stuff that I want to talk about is your fermentation curve. And straight away we see that this is not a linear, this is not exponential, and actually the dough, this is the fermentation and the yeast population, as you may say, in your dough is not linear. You have a lag phase where it sometimes is 10 minutes, but if you put your dough in a chiller, it could go for an hour, 2 hours. Is the time where yeast introduced a new environment, it has to wake up a little. It's a little bit shocked. Once it's shaken off, there's an exponential phase where your yeast and your fermentation happens. And during that phase, more yeast reproduce than die off. The population is very young. There's quite a lot of food available for it, and there's not much pollutant. Then the dough enters the stationary phase, where your fermentation rate is sort of stable. That doesn't mean that it stops. It's just the fermentation speed is sort of does not increase exponentially. It's sort of not slows down, but it does slow down a little. But it's sort of constant. This is where the similar amount of yeast reproduce then die off. The population has matured. Yeast produce alcohol. We have some lactobacillus. We have some acid in there. So all of those factors make the population of yeasts sort of plateau. At some point of time, the population and the fermentation rate will decrease because the alcohol, the acid, the byproducts of fermentation start killing the yeasts off. The population is falling off the cliff, and we've got a sort of declining rate of fermentation and declining rate. It's also that the resources, you might find that your overproof dough suddenly loses color. That's because the yeast have already eaten up majority of the sugar and they started to nibble on your gluten. During that stationary phase, all the yeast that die out, they form something called, during the breakdown of the cells, there's a certain organic compound released, which will make your dough more extensible. So the older your population of yeast, the more yeast died and decomposed, the dough will be more extensible, easier to pin, more sort of easy to handle. During the death phase, what you're going to see is you're going to see quite a lot of breakdown in protein. Now, this is super important curve for us because what we've got is we've got the curve, the red curve is the growth of yeast in dough versus temperature. And we can see that in a controlled environment of 15 to 20 degrees, the difference is quite smaller. But if you have a hot day during the wedding and you're between 28 and 35, the curve is much steeper. And that led us to believe that the environment that you guys operate is really where your performance window has to be wide, whether your fermentation rate will be differing. So we need to put some measures in your gluten and in the way we build the dough to make sure that your dough survives these severe sort of fermentation changes. I think the last nerdy, the nerdy graph in blue, you can see the gluten strength, gluten degradation. In yellow, or the yolky yellow, you can see the proofing curve that we've seen before. You can just see this is cold proofing. This is not an ambient one. You can see that there are spots where your dough is active and when your gluten strength is still very good. Now, gluten strength has to be at a medium. If it's really high, then you won't be able to open the dough. It'll be very, very, very hard to open, very elastic. If that curve progresses to a really low point, that gluten will be tearing. So we're trying to find sweet spots. Where we've designed our street food dough, we push the blue curve north to give you a better starting point and much more resistance, and give you time and an optimal, so the yeast are free to ferment, to multiply, but your gluten is still robust enough. Another thing that's really important in building up your gluten is your preferments, and we've got two choices. I'm going to be very brief about that. There's tons of science behind it, but you either on the left have a liquid preferment, your Polish, your levain, your sourdough levain, etc., etc. On the right hand side, you will have a stiff preferment, call it the bigger sponge, etc. As a rule of thumb, the more liquid and hydrated the preferment is, the more flavor, more aroma it does, but it reduces your window because it makes the dough super active. On the right hand side, we have things like Italian biga, like sponges, where the preferment is stiff, is less hydrated. It gives you a better dough structure and it strengthens the final dough, although it does yield in less aroma and less flavor. What we've done is we've placed our street food dough preferment somewhere on that scale to have the best of both worlds. We've chosen Italian biga. It is a very, very, very traditional Italian preferment. Think ciabattas, really. A lot of sort of Roman style dough, etc. Lower hydration means slower fermentation. Stronger gluten matrix from dry, more elastic preferment, and it yields in a broader, more forgiving proofing window with a more resistance to collapse. That's another building block of our dough, where we've had our strong flour, but now we're also introducing a bigger preferment. We have chosen a very long fermented biga. So your dough that you would receive samples or hopefully order in somewhere down the line will be pre-fermented for 48 hours. So you can forget about these dough conditioning sort of stories that you have to make your dough balls and then store them for 48 hours. You might not have facilities for that. You might not have means of rotating that stock properly. We've already pre-fermented parts of that dough for 48 hours. So a usually neutral in flavors and aromas biga acquires better sort of aroma and flavor profile due to some magic trick that's called esterification. And in short, esters are organic and aromatic compounds that create fruity and aromatic flavors. Same way as we can produce vanilla flavors from non-organic compound, or during the long maturation process, you can have whiskey tasting or smelling of toffee and vanilla where it was nowhere near vanilla or toffee. We can kickstart that chemical reaction because we're giving the biga time and we have enough strength in the gluten to slowly develop, to arrive at that point where that sort of chemical reaction can start taking place. So you have organic acids, the acetic, the lactic, and fumaric. They're adding complexity with esters. So usually to achieve this final on cold proof is performed. So you would have some Neapolitan pizzerias boiling their dough and then taking it through 2-day fermentation or 3 even day fermentation to have that lovely compounds. We've done that. We've sort of built in that aspect into the dough. Again, to allow for esterification, a really strong flour is required. It's not only in strength, but it's quality of protein, because we want that dough to be resistant the breakdown, and for that dough to for that gluten to still be at the point of the esterification to really kick in and not to be compromised at all. So the sturdy for street dough is based on the concept of stiff pre-ferment combined with strong flour and also no additives. Quite a lot of those on the market will have improvers in, and the improvers are there to shorten that window of performance. And this is the reason why, if you ever had different samples of frozen dough, they might not have worked for you, because they are designed to work really quickly out of the box. And the enzymes are being put in that dough to shorten that window, that performance window, to shorten the fermentation time. You will arrive, because of that 48-hour pre-ferment fermentation and your journey to your clients, long sort of setup times. The dough is designed to sort of create the enzymes and create the organic compounds in time for your service, rather than putting it in a sort of, it's a bit back to front for you. It's not back to front in a pizzeria that want to just defrost the dough and start serving at 9. But for you, we have that time. And because of the 48-hour fermentation, we would have a lot of these enzymes and compounds already built into the dough. The long fermentation ensures the complex aromas and flavors without the need of long to cold proofing, clean label without any conditioners, allowing the gluten to remain intact through defrost and proofing. A lot of enzymes are there and improvers are there to damage the gluten to make it more flexible. You don't need that. Hence, the dough is ready to be defrosted in ambient without adverse effect of performance. We sort of think that you want to be putting your dough in boxes round about 11 p.m. the day before. And the dough will be fully defrosted by around 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. in ambient, not in a chiller. And then that dough can be taken to an event and last throughout the day. Yes, and that you can sort of stagger it, you can mix it up, you can take some dough out frozen at 6 a.m. to last well into the night. So you have 2 batches. You can have a backup batch, and we've got quite good sort of creative videos that show us what to do with frozen dough to defrost it quicker and prove it really quick. But the idea is that you defrost in ambient without adverse effect on performance. Just put the trays night before, ready to be used within 6 to 10 hours. It also it happens to be that if you test it right and the ambient temperature is sort of 28, 30 degrees, you could even be putting it in trays at 6 a.m. in the morning for your event at 4 or 5, and it'll be ready. So there you go. That was me. That was my sort of nerdy bit. But I just wanted everyone to understand what was the reason, what were the building blocks of a street food dough, and how it could improve the quality of your service, and how can reduce a little bit of stress. This is something new. The dough is first on to market in UK. I don't know. I've never heard of street food frozen dough, but it's not just a little tagline, or it's just not the sticker that says street food. It's sort of built in to be working for you.